John D. Rockefeller's journey from a farm boy with a handful of dollars to the wealthiest man in America is nothing short of legendary. But his story is far more than just the tale of an oil tycoon. It's a story of ambition, controversy, redemption, and transformation, from the heights of corporate power to the depths of philanthropy. Rockefeller's legacy challenges our understanding of success. Was he a ruthless robber, baron, or a man who, in the end, used his fortune to change the world? Let's take a deeper look into the extraordinary life of one of America's most complex figures. John D. Rockefeller's story begins not amid the bustle of cities or the clamor of wealth, but on a quiet, windswept farm in Richford, New York, in 1839. The world he entered was simple, almost austere, shaped by hard labor and harder truths. His father, William Big Bill Rockefeller, was a figure of contradictions, a traveling snake oil salesman with a silver tongue whose charm masked a life of restless schemes and half-truths. Big Bill taught his son early that the world could be deceiving, that success often favored those who could bend it to their will. In contrast, John's mother, Eliza, was a pillar of uncompromising faith and virtue. A strict, devout Baptist, she imbued in young John the values of hard work, discipline, frugality, and unwavering faith. She taught her children that every penny mattered, that charity was not optional but a sacred duty, and that God watched even the smallest acts. In their modest home, the contrast between Big Bill's bravado and Eliza's quiet steadfastness planted in John a strange but potent seed, a belief that wealth and morality could somehow be reconciled. By the age of 12, John had internalized these lessons with fierce intensity. While other boys his age dreamed of adventure or mischief, John was counting his earnings from odd jobs, raising turkeys, digging potatoes, selling candy door to door. Over time, through sweat and endless saving, he accumulated over $50, a staggering amount for a farm boy at the time. At his mother's urging, he did something extraordinary. He lent that money to a neighbor, charging interest. When the first small repayment came due, Rockefeller felt a thrill that stayed with him forever. Later he would say it plainly, "Money should be my servant, not my master." This early lesson would not just define his approach to finance. It would shape his view of life itself. Thrift, patience, strategy, control, these were the cornerstones of his character, poured into him drop by drop on that New York farm. As the seasons turned and the fields grew ripe and fell fallow, so too did John D. Rockefeller's ambitions begin to sprout and take root. Few could have seen it then, but from that quiet soil would emerge a man who would one day wield a fortune so vast that it would shake the very foundations of the American economy. And yet the question looms, how did this boy from a poor farm, raised between the teachings of a saint and the tricks of a swindler, rise to seize such unimaginable power? The answer was only beginning to take shape. After moving to Cleveland, Ohio with his family in 1853, young John D. Rockefeller, only 14 years old at the time, found himself in a city on the cusp of explosive growth. Railroads were expanding, trade was booming, and Rockefeller, with his iron discipline and quiet intensity, was determined to carve out his place in this new world. At 16, he landed his first real job as a bookkeeper, earning a modest wage but gaining something far more valuable: an intimate understanding of money, transactions, and the fragile heartbeat of commerce. Numbers spoke to him. Patterns revealed themselves where others saw only confusion. Rockefeller quickly distinguished himself. His supervisors marveled at his focus. The boy who never wasted a penny, never wasted a moment. Every ledger he touched, every deal he witnessed, became a lesson filed away for future conquest. It was clear to anyone who watched him, this young man wasn't merely working. He was studying, planning, sharpening himself for something greater. Before long, Rockefeller and partners launched their own commission merchant business, buying and selling produce. It was profitable work, but Rockefeller's restless mind was already scanning the horizon for bigger opportunities. And then it came news from Pennsylvania of vast oil fields of thick, sticky black crude gushing from the earth, promising untold fortunes. America's hunger for kerosene to light its homes made oil the new gold. In 1863, Rockefeller made his move. He invested in an oil refinery outside Cleveland, a modest facility at first, but a venture that, to him, was as serious and sacred as any cathedral. He studied every step of refining, cutting waste, driving costs down, ensuring efficiency with a precision that seemed almost fanatical. By 1865, the refinery wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. Within 2 short years, it had become the largest in the region. Imagine the scene: the cold Cleveland nights pierced by the glow of kerosene lanterns, trains clattering in the distance, bearing barrels of oil across a restless, rising nation. And amid it all, a young man, barely into his 20s, quietly cornering the market. But Rockefeller's ambitions burned brighter still. In 1870, along with a handful of trusted associates, including the brilliant and shrewd Henry Flagler, he formally incorporated the Standard Oil Company of Ohio. It was a name that would soon become synonymous with dominance. What followed was a relentless march toward control. Through a ruthless combination of efficiency, secret deals, and strategic acquisitions, Rockefeller set about crushing his competition. By 1872, Standard Oil didn't just operate in Cleveland, it ruled it. Rockefeller orchestrated a plan so masterful that nearly every refinery in the city either sold out to him, merged with him, or was driven out of business entirely. Oil had become the lifeblood of America's expanding economy, fueling lanterns, industry, and progress itself, and John D. Rockefeller controlled almost all of it. His empire was just beginning. By the closing decades of the 19th century, Rockefeller's Standard Oil headquarters towered over Manhattan, a fortress of polished stone and iron, while casting a long shadow over the American economy. Inside its walls, decisions were made that would ripple across the country, affecting the lives of oilmen, railroad barons, and everyday citizens alike. Standard Oil wasn't just a company. It had become an empire, intricate, secretive, and nearly all-powerful. By 1900, Rockefeller's reach extended into every corner of the oil business. About 90% of all oil refining in the United States flowed through Standard Oil's grasp. With such staggering dominance, Rockefeller could set prices at will. He could dictate terms to the railroads, the wholesalers, the retailers, even the foreign markets. Competitors either bowed to Standard Oil or were trampled beneath its relentless advance. But such power bred enemies, and soon the first cracks in the empire's public image began to form. In the 1870s, in a move that would later haunt him, Rockefeller and his allies quietly negotiated secret deals with railroad companies, forging the notorious South Improvement Company. Under these clandestine arrangements, Standard Oil would receive enormous rebates on every barrel of oil it shipped, while competitors were charged exorbitantly high rates, effectively pricing them out of the market. When word of the scheme leaked, it unleashed a firestorm. Independent oil producers, furious and betrayed, rallied together in a wave of outrage. Across Pennsylvania and Ohio, oilmen stormed into the streets carrying banners that read, "Down with the conspirators, and don't give up the ship." Meetings turned into protests, protests into near riots. Railroad offices were besieged by angry crowds. The very men who had once dreamt of fortunes from oil now saw their livelihoods slipping through their fingers, crushed by the unseen hand of Rockefeller's network. The public outcry grew louder when a determined journalist named Ida Tarbell, whose own family had been devastated by Rockefeller's tactics, set out to investigate Standard Oil's practices. With meticulous research and quiet fury, she chronicled the company's manipulations in a series of devastating articles. She painted Rockefeller not as a business genius, but as a cold, calculating architect of monopolistic tyranny, describing Standard Oil as the monster, a many-headed hydra devouring all in its path. Rockefeller, as always, maintained a veneer of calm. He defended rebates as a common practice of the day, a simple reward for volume and efficiency. But behind the scenes, he understood the stakes. His reputation was shifting, solidifying into something darker, more sinister. To many Americans, he was no longer the thrifty boy from a New York farm, but a symbol of unchecked greed, the quintessential robber baron of the Gilded Age. The tension between Rockefeller and the American public was no longer a murmur, it had become a roar, and the forces gathering against him were only just beginning. By the early years of the 20th century, the American public had grown weary of giants, corporate titans, whose names loomed over the economy like immovable mountains. Standard Oil had once symbolized the thrilling possibilities of industry, but now, to many, it stood as a monument to inequality, secrecy, and overwhelming power. Calls for reform echoed through the halls of government. The era of unchecked monopolies was ending, and John D. Rockefeller's empire was about to face its greatest reckoning. In 1906, the United States Department of Justice, under mounting public pressure, filed a lawsuit against Standard Oil, invoking the Sherman Antitrust Act. The government charged Rockefeller's company with illegally restraining trade and stifling competition. The lawsuit sent shockwaves through Wall Street, through boardrooms, through Rockefeller's own ranks. The once invincible company now faced the unrelenting gaze of the law. The legal battle was titanic in scale, dragging on for years. Teams of lawyers clashed in packed courtrooms, arguing over every contract, every acquisition, every secret rebate. Standard Oil's defenders portrayed the company as a model of efficiency, a national treasure that had lowered costs and improved quality for consumers. Prosecutors, on the other hand, painted it as a brutal monopoly, using every dirty trick in the book to crush rivals and rig markets. At last, in 1911, the Supreme Court delivered its verdict. The ruling was devastating and final. Standard Oil was guilty of violating antitrust laws. It must be dismantled. The judgment struck like a thunderclap. Under the court's decree, Standard Oil would be broken into 33 separate entities, each of them forcibly disentangled from the web Rockefeller had so carefully spun over decades. Familiar names would later emerge from this shattering: ExxonMobil, Chevron, and others, companies that would themselves become titans in the oil industry. Ironically, the breakup only made Rockefeller richer. With the new company's stock soaring on the market, his already astronomical fortune multiplied several times over. By 1913, the size of Rockefeller's personal wealth was so staggering that it amounted to nearly 2% of the entire United States economy, an amount so vast it seemed almost mythical. Yet there was no triumph in his victory. The empire he had built with such ruthless precision was gone, its pieces scattered like a broken crown across the marketplace. Though he had outlasted his critics, though he had weathered the storm, there was a melancholy weight to the moment. Rockefeller himself, now well into his 70s, had withdrawn from the public eye. The boy who once lent out $50 at interest, the young man who once stayed up all night counting barrels of oil, had become a symbol of an age that was passing into history, a gilded age of raw ambition, sprawling wealth, and bitter consequence. The oil empire was dismantled, but John D. Rockefeller, the man, remained older, richer, and more complex than the simple caricature of a villain or a hero. By the time Rockefeller's empire had been shattered by the antitrust laws, the man himself had already begun to change. The fierce, unyielding tycoon of the past was no more. The man who once moved with cold, calculating precision through the world of business now found his gaze turned inward and outward toward the world he had once dominated. Rockefeller, in his later years, faced a question that perhaps no one could have predicted. What does one do with wealth so vast it eclipses everything else? What does a man do when his empire is no longer needed, when the battle for power has been won, but at a cost he cannot fully measure? The answer came not in more business deals, but in a mission far larger than himself. In 1890, Rockefeller made the first in a series of donations that would change the landscape of American society. He gifted $600,000 to help establish the University of Chicago. It was an enormous sum. Yet what made the gesture even more remarkable was Rockefeller's insistence that his name never appear on the campus. For a man so accustomed to seeing his name associated with success and power, this act of humility was a profound shift. Over the years, his contributions to the University of Chicago would grow exponentially, eventually amounting to tens of millions of dollars. Under his financial support, the university flourished, becoming a beacon of research and academic excellence. He later remarked that the university had been the best investment I ever made. His desire to build institutions of learning to shape the future of knowledge began to define his later life. But his giving did not stop there. In 1901, Rockefeller founded the Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research, one of the first research institutes dedicated to finding solutions to the world's most pressing health problems. Then, in 1913, he established the Rockefeller Foundation, endowing it with a staggering $182 million. It was a sum so vast that in today's terms it would be the equivalent of billions of dollars. This foundation would go on to have a transformative impact on public health, medicine, the arts, and education across the globe. Rockefeller believed deeply in the power of science and philanthropy to shape a better world, and his donations would fund breakthroughs in everything from infectious disease prevention to public education reform. Perhaps his most extraordinary legacy came from his support of efforts to combat diseases that ravaged poor communities, especially in the American South. Rockefeller's charitable foundation spearheaded initiatives that nearly eradicated hookworm, a parasitic disease that had long been a scourge in the region. In the 1920s, his foundation's efforts also led to major strides in fighting yellow fever, saving thousands of lives in the process. By the time of his death in 1937, John D. Rockefeller had given away more than $500 million, an amount so vast it could scarcely be imagined at the time. His philanthropic legacy, defined by his belief that wealth should be a tool for public good, reshaped the way Americans thought about giving. He had proven that the power to amass a fortune could also be the power to change lives for the better. His transformation from oil magnate to benefactor was not just a personal evolution, it was a revolution in how the world viewed philanthropy. Rockefeller, once seen as a ruthless robber baron, had become a model of modern charity, a pioneer of the idea that wealth, when used wisely, can change the world. When John D. Rockefeller passed away in 1937, the world paused to take stock of the man who had in many ways defined the age. His name had been spoken with awe and fear, admiration and scorn. He was both the symbol of the American dream, an immigrant's son who rose from humble beginnings to unimaginable wealth, and a figure of controversy, a man whose actions sparked debates about ethics, power, and inequality. To this day, his legacy is woven into the fabric of American history. His name is synonymous with wealth, yet it is also tied to a transformation in the very nature of philanthropy. In the years following his death, his influence continued to expand. His spirit reflected not just in the many institutions he helped to create, but in the countless others who, inspired by his example, sought to follow his path of giving. His legacy can be seen in the faces of students walking through the University of Chicago, in the researchers at the Rockefeller Institute, and in the medical professionals who benefited from the programs he supported. But for all the public institutions bearing his name, universities, foundations, medical institutes, the question of how to view Rockefeller's life remains a complex one. For some, he is a figure of mythic proportions, a symbol of the potential of individual ambition and determination. They view him as a titan who transformed the world, who provided the foundation for the modern oil industry and revolutionized American enterprise. Yet for others, Rockefeller remains a symbol of the darker side of capitalism, the robber baron who built his fortune at the expense of others, who exploited the very workers whose labor created his wealth. His monopolistic practices, his manipulation of markets, and his disdain for government oversight earned him a reputation that, in the minds of many, could never be fully erased. Even in the face of his massive philanthropy, the scars of his business practices lingered. Indeed, Rockefeller's life is a paradox, a tangled web of ambition, ingenuity, generosity, and controversy. There is no simple way to categorize him. He is neither a saint nor a sinner, but rather a man who, for all his flaws, reshaped the world in ways both remarkable and troubling. Perhaps the most enduring aspect of Rockefeller's legacy lies in this complexity. His story serves as a reminder that the pursuit of power, of wealth, and of success is not a straightforward journey. It is fraught with ethical dilemmas, with choices that will echo through time long after the individual has passed from the scene. And in the end, it is not only the wealth a person amasses, but how they use it, how they wield their influence, that defines their true legacy. John D. Rockefeller, the boy from a small New York farm who rose to control an empire and then gave it away, exemplifies a singular American paradox. A figure who built a colossal fortune through unyielding competition and ruthless tactics, only to spend the latter half of his life attempting to reshape the world for the better. A man of extraordinary wealth, he also became one of the world's greatest philanthropists. In this, he challenges us to think deeply about the nature of power, the purpose of wealth, and the complexities of human ambition. As students lay flowers at his bust on the University of Chicago campus, as researchers continue to benefit from the institutions he helped create, we are left with this profound question. How do we remember Rockefeller? As a man who built an empire and used that empire to change the world, or as a figure who, for all his philanthropy, can never escape the shadow of the methods that brought him his wealth? Perhaps the truth lies somewhere in between. In the end, his story is not just about wealth. It is a reflection of the age-old tension between ambition and morality, between the individual and the collective, and between what is taken and what is given back. Rockefeller's life, both triumphant and tragic, serves as a timeless reminder that with great power comes great responsibility, and that true legacy is often forged in the choices we make after we have gained everything we set out to achieve. And there you have it, John D. Rockefeller's legacy, a tapestry woven with threads of both admiration and criticism. But what do you think? Was Rockefeller the embodiment of the American dream, or does his controversial business legacy overshadow his philanthropic efforts? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your perspective in the comments below. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the life of one of history's most fascinating figures, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more compelling stories about the people and events that shaped our world. Stay tuned for more, and as always, thank you for watching.